The American Musical Theater, an informal music workshop in a series of programs tracing the origin, the development, the contributions of the American musical theater as a native American art. With students from the New York City high schools, Alfredo Antonini and the CBS Orchestra. Singers Jack Russell and Jacqueline Moody. And the director of the workshop, Jim Morse.
Thank you, Maestro. Isn't that a wonderful way to start a workshop with music from a Broadway show? But I should ask you, did you recognize that music? Did you? What was it?
It's the overture to My Fair Lady.
That's right, Sina. And how many of you have seen My Fair Lady? Oh, almost all of you. Well, then you should know who wrote it. And who was that? Rosie?
George Bernard Shaw wrote My Fair Lady.
Well, he wrote the play on which My Fair Lady was based. He wrote Pygmalion. But who wrote the words and the music to the score? Yes.
Lerner and Lowe.
That's right, Paul, Lerner and Lowe. But you must remember this. Musicals like My Fair Lady and South Pacific and Music Man just didn't happen overnight. It took about 100 years for the musical play as we see it on Broadway today to develop. So I thought that in today's session of the workshop, we'd go back to those early days when there was lots of entertainment. But we're just going to focus on 4 kinds of entertainment today: vaudeville, extravaganza, burlesque, and musical farce. And this all started back in New York City in the last half of the 19th century when Broadway and 42nd Street were way uptown. And the center of entertainment in New York was located at 14th Street and Union Square. You know where Klein's department store is. And if you were strolling around Union Square at that time, you'd probably be humming or whistling or singing songs like these.
She's my sweetheart, I'm her beau. She's my Annie, I'm her Joe. Soon we'll marry, never to part, for little Annie Rooney is my sweetheart.
East side, west side, all around the town. The tops I'm ringing are rosy, London Bridge is falling down. Girls and boys together, me and Jamie are all tripped the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage, I can't afford a carriage, but you look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle built for two.
Well, they not only sing well, they ride a pretty good bicycle too, don't they? Well, those were the kind of songs that were sung during that time. Because this was an era that was leisurely. and sentimental and somewhat naive, and this was reflected in those songs. And let's see now what New York looked like during that time. Find out what was happening. This was the time when pedestrians were dodging bicycles on the streets of New York and carriages with horses. They had to dodge both at the same time sometimes. And these were the days when horse-drawn vehicles were being slowly replaced by shiny new automobiles. And Milady went from the horse and buggy to the iron monsters of the road. In 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge was completed, the first to span the East River, and the then longest suspension bridge in the world. That grand lady in New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty, was unveiled in 1886, a gift from the people of France. And a new ride was introduced at Coney Island, that dizzy, heart-pounding roller coaster. The first electric trolley cars were seen on the streets of New York. And in this final quarter of the 19th century, the dramatic stage in New York presented the debuts of Sarah Bernhardt and Eleonora Duse. The Metropolitan Opera was dedicated in 1883, and the Golden Curtain went up on a performance of Gounod's opera, Faust. Well, New York was a bustling city even then. But remember, the bustle referred to the costumes of the women of that period and not to the hectic pace of activity. And here she is, the woman who set men's hearts afire. She was the pin-up girl of her time. Her hourglass figure set the fashion standards of the day. Her name, Lillian Russell. Well, you see, a lot of things were happening at that time, and I hope you're making note of them, too, because I might be getting back to you and ask you questions about them later. Well, remember, I said there was lots of entertainment during those days, but the one the public seemed to like most was vaudeville. And a man named Tony Pastor was responsible for that, because you may not believe this, but vaudeville was presented mostly in saloons in the 1850s and 60s, and men could never take their families to a saloon to see the show. So Tony Pastor decided to change all that. And he rolled up his sleeves, and he almost single-handedly took vaudeville out of the saloons, cleaned it up, put it into a theater of his own, Tony Pastor's Music Hall, and presented wholesome family entertainment. And he knew how to attract the crowds, too. Free pots and pans and groceries to the ladies. No smoking or drinking in the auditorium. And the prices of tickets were fantastic. 25 cents to 50 cents for general admission and $1 for a reserved seat. And what do we pay today? Well, here are the figures right out of today's paper. $6.90, $7.50, $8.05. Well, you didn't have to pay $8.05 to see a big star in those days. And some of the biggest stars got their start in vaudeville at Tony Pastor's Music Hall. There was Lillian Russell, the four Cohans, that's George M. Cohan, his mom, his dad, his sister, the comic team of Weber and Fields, and Harrigan and Hart. And there were a couple of really bright boys, Harrigan and Hart. Ned Harrigan, now listen to this, you may not believe it. He wrote 80 sketches and about 35 full-length plays during his lifetime. And he not only wrote them, but he and his partner, Tony Hart, acted in them. And the most famous were called the Mulligan Guard. Now, they did something that no one else had ever done before. For the first time, they presented Bowery characters on the stage in real New York settings. Now, since then, New York has been a popular subject in Broadway musicals. Now, can you name some recent ones that have had a New York setting to them? Yes, Bob?
West Side Story.
West Side Story?
Guys and dolls.
Guys and Dolls.
Wonderful Town.
Wonderful Town. There was On the Town. Street Scene. Can you call A Tree Grows in Brooklyn a New York musical? And George M. Cohan wrote many of the musical plays. Well, Ned Harrigan was a clever guy. And so he had a pad and a pencil. And he'd go out on the streets for his material. Or he'd sit on a park bench, you know, next to two little old ladies, and he'd overhear their conversation, write it down, A couple of nights later, there would be up on the stage. And nobody knew where he got his material. Well, these Mulligan Guard plays had a lot of slapstick comedy. And they had a lot of music, too. Music that might have sounded something like this. Well, every orchestra had a banjo, and every orchestra had a mandolin. And a mandolin was a favorite subject, and a favorite instrument, I should say, in the home, too, because a boy could serenade his girl on the back porch, or on the front porch, or out on the lake. And if he lost the paddle to his canoe, there would be the old mandolin, and off he'd go. You might try that sometime. But what the audience really waited for in those vaudeville shows was, can you tell me? Well, it was the sentimental ballad, where right was right and wrong was wrong. And every sentimental ballad had three surefire ingredients: sentimental, simple lyrics, a waltz rhythm, and a lovely, sweet melody. And the songwriters got their material just the way Ned Harrigan did in Everyday Happenings. Here's one for you right here. This was written by a man named Edward Marks. He wrote the words to it. And one day, he was looking through the newspaper, and he came across an article about a little girl who was wandering lost about the streets of New York. And she was found by a policeman. Now, so help me, the policeman turned out to be the little girl's long-lost father. That's what they tell me. And Edward Marks wrote the words, Joseph Stern wrote the music. And Jack, would you be our long-lost father for us, please?
I'll play the police.
Okay. Well, Marks and Stern got together again, and they wrote another famous song of that period. And this was about a waitress who was insulted in a restaurant. And a third smash hit of the time concerned a man who waited for a letter that never came. And that was written by Paul Dresser, whose brother, by the way, was the novelist Theodore Dreiser. Did you know that? No. But now let's listen to those three sentimental ballads.
A passing policeman found a little child. She walked beside him, dried her tears, and smiled. Said he to her kindly, "Now please do not cry. I will find your mother for you by and by." At the station when he asked her for her name, and she answered, "Jenny," why, it made him exclaim, "At last of your mother I now have a trace. Your dear little features bring back her sweet face. Do not fear, my little darling, and I will take you right home. Come and sit down close beside me. No more from me you shall roam, for you were a babe in arms when your mother left me one day. Left me at home, deserted, alone, and took you, my child, away.
Two drummers sat at dinner in a grand hotel one day. While dining, they were chatting in a jolly sort of way. And when a pretty waitress brought them a tray of food, they spoke to her familiarly, in manner rather rude. At first, first she did not notice them, nor make the least reply. But one remark was passed that brought the teardrops to her eyes. And facing her tormentor, with cheeks now burning red, she looked a perfect picture as appealingly she said, "My mother was a lady like yours, you will allow, and you may have a sister who needs protection now. I've come to this great city to find a brother dear, and you wouldn't dare insult me, sir, if Jack were only
Was it from a gray-haired mother, or a sister, or a brother? Had he waited all the many years in vain? Yet from early morning light, he would wait with spirits bright. But the letter that he longed for never came. You know, I think he's still waiting for that letter. Yes, Bob?
Well, Jim, were these songs actually meant to be taken seriously? They would seem a bit overdone to us now.
Well, perhaps to you today, but you know, in those days, from what I've read about this, they were written in a straightforward manner, because the songwriters knew that there was a public for this kind of song, and they bought song sheets by the thousands, and if they started to kid it, nobody would buy it. So they played it kind of straight. Now, am I going too fast in any of this for you? You taking your notes? Is everything all right? Good. Well, you know, it took a baritone like Jack and a soprano like Jackie to make a tear come to the eye. But it took a barbershop quartet to really start the tears flowing. And one of their favorite barbershop ballads was... Bob, everybody, don't get me wrong. People weren't always crying in those days. There were some bright and peppy songs, too. Nice, lively ones like these.
While strolling through the park one day, in the merry month of May,
I was taken by surprise by a pair of roguish eyes. In a moment, my poor heart was stole away.
of course we were as happy as can be.
I immediately tipped my hat, and sweetly she replied,
I never shall forget that lovely afternoon
when I met her at the fountain in the park.
Maestro, Alfredo, was there another big smash hit during that time?
Yes, tararaboom dire. You know what we should do? I tell you what we do. You sing with us. I give you the first note, the note you have to start to sing, and follow me. We have lots of fun.
Yeah.
having fun? Oh, good. Well, you might have been singing Tarara Boom Dier in a vaudeville show, or you might have been attending an extravaganza. And that had something for everybody. Scenery moving up and down the stage floor, opening and closing, and marching bands, and singers and dancing girls. And one of the most extravagant extravaganzas of that time opened in 1866 at Niblo's Garden, with performances every evening and Saturday afternoons at 2 p.m. with an actual outlay of $50,000. The original, grand, romantic, magical, and spectacular drama in 4 acts by Charles M. Barris, Esquire, entitled The Black Crook. Not yet, Mike. Just a minute. That's something cute. Now, on opening night, listen to this. Opening night, the curtain went up at 7:45, and it didn't come down until 1:15 the next morning. And the actors were just as beat as the audience were, and I don't know how they did it. But this is what they saw. A boiling cauldron, a carnival, 100 French ballerinas, a hurricane, a masquerade, a flock of doves, 100 angels, and the devil himself. Now listen to the story. Herzog, the Black Crook, makes a pact with the devil. Now, Mike. He agrees to deliver 1 human soul each year just before midnight on New Year's Eve. 3 characters important to our story are our hero, Rudolph, a painter. Our heroine, Amina, a bucolic belle. And a certain Count Wolfenstein. Wolfenstein kidnaps Amina and through brilliant skullduggery imprisons Rudolph in a dark, damp, deep dungeon. But Herzog, the Black Crook, decides to make Rudolph his victim for the year, and with his magical powers, frees Rudolph from the dark, damp, deep dungeon. He cleverly persuades Rudolph to hunt for some hidden treasure. But en route through the forest, Rudolph saves the life of a dove from the jaws of a serpent. The dove is in reality a fairy queen who exposes Herzog's trickery. Count Wolfenstein is killed, Rudolph marries Amina, and the devil carts Herzog, the Black Crook, off to Hades. Well, you paid your money and you took your choice of so many forms of entertainment, but the ones we're talking about: vaudeville, extravaganza, burlesque, musical farce. And burlesque doesn't mean what you think it does. In those days, it simply meant to parody or to spoof a familiar subject. Yes, lady?
Well, originally, during the 1840s, these burlesques ridiculed politics, but after these extravaganzas, they began doing all sorts of things. They had these girls, and they had lots of legs, you know, because these burlesques began to copy the extravaganzas who made
That's right. They borrowed from every other form of entertainment. Well, I see you've been doing your research. Good, and I hope everyone else...
Also, the extravaganza you were speaking of got all this trick scenery from this Brooklyn Academy of Music that burnt down and just couldn't use it anymore.
Well, you're marvelous. We have to get all the facts from you later on. Well, you know, one of the best musical farces at that time, which was similar to a burlesque, it made fun of a familiar subject, was called A Trip to Chinatown. And that had some fantastic characters in it. People like Well and Strong, a man with 1 foot in the grave. Ben Gay, a wealthy bachelor of San Francisco. Tony Gay, his ward. Rashleigh Gay, nephew of Ben Gay, and many, many others. But there were songs in A Trip to Chinatown, too, like The Bowery and Reuben Reuben. And songs were constantly interpolated into A Trip to Chinatown. That means they were put in during the run of the show. And they were always looking around for that sentimental ballad. Well, one day they found one. And I have the sheet music right here. Well, after this was interpolated into A Trip to Chinatown, it went on to sell over 5 million copies. It became the smash hit of its time.
After the ball is over, after the break of morn, after the dancers leaving, after the stars are gone,
Thank you, Jack. You know what? Jackie Moody was going to sing I Could Have Danced All Night, but we don't have time. So maybe we can call her back at another workshop session, all right? Good. Now, let's recap. The 4 forms of entertainment we discussed today: vaudeville, extravaganza, burlesque, musical, farce. But remember this, at the very same time, there were strong musical influences coming from overseas. From Paris, we got the music of Jacques Offenbach. Vienna sent us those lovely waltzes of Johann Strauss. And from London, those gay, witty comic operas of Gilbert and Sullivan. And all of these were to help create a new American musical theater, the operetta. But that's for next week's session. But before we all leave, Maestro, Jack, Jackie, everybody, let's all join in and sing The Band Played On.
The American Musical Theater is produced by WCBS-TV in cooperation with the Board of Education of the City of New York. Today's program featured Alfredo Antonini and the CBS Orchestra. With Jack Russell and Jacqueline Moody. The director of the workshop, Jim Morse. The children participating on today's program are from the high schools of the City of New York. Visual material courtesy of the Museum of the City of New York and the Chilton Company, publishers of A Pictorial History of the American Theater by David Blum and the E.B. Marks Publishing Company. This has been a presentation of the WCBS-TV Public Affairs Department. The American Musical Theater, an informal music workshop in a series of programs tracing the origin, the development, the contribution of the American musical theater as a Native American art. With students from the New York City high schools, Alfredo Antonini and the CBS Orchestra, singers Earl Wrightson and Barbara Meister, the host for the workshop, Jim Morse.
Thank you, Maestro. Did you recognize that music? Yes, what was it? Well, it was a can-can from Orpheus in the Underworld. And who wrote that? Yes.
Offenbach.
Jacques Offenbach, right. Now, it may seem very strange to you that this very French music should be played on a program called the American Musical Theater. But you'll find out why during today's session. You know, if you were around New York in the 1880s, you could have seen a lot of musical entertainment. Earl, would you please bring that easel over here?
I'd be more than happy to, my boy.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're quite welcome.
Well, if you went to the theater in New York at that time, you might have gone to the Globe Theater and seen this American opera bouffe extravaganza called Evangeline. Now, this was actually a burlesque, a spoof on Longfellow's poem, Evangeline. Or you might have seen this production of Hiawatha, which was a sequel to Evangeline. That had such characters in it as Hiawatha, William Penn Brown, and little Sally Boohoo. Well, also at the same time, Here were our old friends, Harrigan and Hart, at the Theatre Comique, packing them in with a 100th performance of Mulligan Guard's Nominee. And the extravaganza of extravaganzas of that time, the Caralthi Brothers production of Around the World in 80 Days, with the scenery moving up and down, the stage opening and closing. Remember that? And this was a stage production and not a motion picture. Or you might have gone and seen HMS Pinafore, a Gilbert and Sullivan production. Everybody was flocking to the Standard Theatre at that time to hear the bright music and the singable tunes of HMS Pinafore.
I'm called Little Buttercup, dear Little Buttercup, though I could never tell why. But still I'm called Buttercup, poor little Buttercup, sweet little Buttercup I've snuff and tobacco and excellent Jackie. I've scissors and watches and knives. I've ribbons and laces to set off the faces of excellent sweethearts and wives. I've treacle and toffee, I've tea and I've coffee. I've everything that you would want. I've chops and I've chickens, I've pretty polonies and excellent peppermint drops. Then buy up your Buttercup, dear little Buttercup. Sailors should never be shy. So buy up your Buttercup, poor little Buttercup. Come of your Buttercup, buy.
Well, it wasn't just the singable tunes like Poor Little Buttercup that made HMS Pinafore successful. It was also the clever lyrics and the catchy rhymes, the puns, and the quick turn of a phrase like, what, never? No, never. What, never? Well, hardly ever. And when American audiences heard those catchy, quick turns of phrases and the music for the first time in Boston in 1878, they went wild over it. The whole country went Pinafore mad. Why, in New York alone at one time, there were 8 theaters within 5 blocks of each other playing Pinafore at the very same time. Well, Gilbert and Sullivan were quite a team. W.S. Gilbert on the left, Arthur Sullivan on the right. They were different personalities, too. Gilbert was temperamental. He had a great violent temper. Arthur Sullivan was friendly. He was very warm. By the way, who wrote the words and who wrote the music? Yes, sir.
Well, Gilbert wrote the words and Sullivan wrote the music.
Right. And during one of the stormy arguments at rehearsal, an actor once said, Mr. Gilbert, I know my lines. And Gilbert straightened himself up. He looked the actor square in the eye and he said, indeed you do, my boy, but you don't know mine. Well, like so many other Gilbert and Sullivan comic operas, Pinafore was a satire. And in it, there was a topical song of the day. It dealt with the appointment of a civilian book publisher named W.H. Smith to the post of First Lord of the Admiralty of the British Royal Navy. So when audiences first heard this song, they knew very well whom the author had in mind when the character Sir Joseph Porter told about his qualifications for the job of First Lord of the Admiralty of the British Royal Navy.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Maestro, shall we weigh anchor? Yes. Thank you. When I was a lad, I served a term as office boy for an attorney's firm. I cleaned the windows and I swept the floor and I polished up the handle on the big front door. I polished up the handle so carefully that now I am the ruler of the Queen's Navy. Of legal knowledge, I acquired such a grip that they took me into the partnership. That junior partnership, I ween, was the only ship I ever have seen. That kind of a ship so suited me that now I am the ruler of the Queen's Navy. Oompa, oompa. I grew so rich that I was sent by pocket borough into Parliament. I always voted at me party's call, and I never thought of thinking for myself at all. I thought so little they rewarded me by making me the ruler of the Queen's Navy. Now, landsmen all, whoever you may be, if you want to rise to the top of the tree, if your soul is infettered by an office stool, be careful to be guided by this golden rule. Stick close to your desks and never go to sea, and you all may be rulers of the Queen's Navy. Thank you.
By the way, how many other musical writing teams can you name? Yes, Ina.
Rogers and Hammerstein.
Yes? Stephen?
Hart.
Rogers and Hart.
Lerner and Lowe.
Lerner and Lowe. How many others? Arthur Schwartz, Howard Dietz, George and Ira Gershwin, right? Good. Well, I know some of them too myself, as you can well see. Well, the success of Pinafore set the pattern for almost everything else that Gilbert and Sullivan wrote. And they knew exactly what they were doing. Because Gilbert felt that humor arose not from the comic with a red nose and the fright wig and the clown's costume, but from the situation. A serious character seen in a ridiculous situation. And so they wrote down a set of principles that they followed in writing their comic operas. They said that 1, no man should play a woman's part. 2, no woman should play a man's part. Because remember, in burlesque, the hero's part was played by the leading lady wearing tights. And Gilbert and Sullivan wanted nothing to do with this. And they also said that 3, dialogue should not be offensive. And they kept this very set of principles in almost every comic opera they wrote. And they wrote almost 1 comic opera every year. And the next one that America went mad over was The Mikado. And this had 3 ingredients that almost every Gilbert and Sullivan comic opera had. The elderly couple, the comic character, and the 2 young lovers. And they had silly names like Coco and Pooh Bah. Well, the boy's name in Mikado was Nanky Poo. The girl's name was Yum Yum. Well, let's meet our heroine Yum Yum in part of a scene from Act 2 of The Mikado.
Yes, I am indeed beautiful. Sometimes I sit and wonder, in my artless Japanese way, why it is that I am so much more attractive than anybody else in the whole world. Can this be vanity? No. Nature is lovely and rejoices in her loveliness. I am a child of nature, and take after me, Mother. The sun whose rays are all ablaze with ever-living glory does not deny his majesty. He scorns to tell a story. He won't exclaim, I blush for shame, so kindly be indulgent. But fierce and bold in fiery good, he glories all effulgent. I mean to rule the earth as he the sky. We really know our worth, the sun and I. I mean to rule the earth as he the sky. We really know our worth, the sun and I.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, no Gilbert and Sullivan show would ever be complete without that tongue-tripping satire on topical subjects known as the patter song. Here's Earl to sing one for you.
Well, before we patter her along, maybe we ought to tell about it, huh?
Okay, Earl, fine.
Well, actually, this is the Lord High Executioner, Coco, who really is not very vicious at all. He's really a physical coward. Come down to at the end of the thing, he turns out to be afraid of his wife, even. But just in case that someday he might have to conduct an execution to keep his job, he has made a little list. Maestro, shall we enumerate?
Yes.
And they did.
As someday it may happen that a victim must be found, I've got a little list. I've got a little list of society offenders who might well be underground and who never would be missed. They never would be missed. There's the pestilential nuisances who write for autographs. Oh, people who have flabby hands and irritating laughs. Oh, children who are up in dates and blow you with them flat. All persons who on shaking hands shake hands with you like that. And all third persons who on spoiling tete-a-tetes insist they none of them be missed. They none of them be missed. Thank you. There's the sobbing serenader and the others of his race, and the piano organist. I don't think he'd be missed. The people who eat peppermint and puff it in your face, they'd none of them be missed. They'd none of them be missed. And the idiot who praises with enthusiastic tone, oh, centuries, but this in every country but his own. And the lady from the provinces who dresses like a guy, and who doesn't think she waltzes, but would rather like to try. Oh, dear. And that singular anomaly, the lady novelist. I don't think she'd be missed. I'm sure she'd not be missed. There's that nicey Prius nuisance who just now is rather right, the judicial humorist. I've got him on the list. All funny fellows, comic men, and clowns of private life, they'd none of them be missed. They'd none of them be missed. An apologetic statesman of a compromising kind, such as Thigney Bob and what's his name, and likewise never mind, and what's his name, and also you know who. The task of filling up the blanks I'd rather leave to you. But it really doesn't matter whom you put up on the list, because they'd none of them be missed. They'd none of them be missed. Quite a list. What was your name, young man?
Alfredo Antonini.
Alfredo Antonini. Ma, grazie.
Ah, prego, prego. Well, that's a mighty big little list that Earl has. That roll it right up now, too. You know, during that time, there was a great interest in everything Oriental. As a matter of fact, there's been a current revival in Oriental things, hasn't there, in the stage plays and movies? Can you name some stage plays and movies that have had an Oriental setting to them? Roz?
Well, The World of Susie Wong.
Yes, Greg?
Flower Drum Song.
Sheila?
She said it.
She said it.
Majority of one.
Majority of one. Linda?
Sayonara.
Sayonara, of course. But let me stress this particular point at this time. And American composers weren't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They tried their hand at operetta, too. But they all show the Gilbert and Sullivan influence. And one of them, I have a poster of one of those American comic operas right here. This was called Wang. And it featured the great male star of its day, DeWolf Hopper. And this was a direct offshoot of The Mikado. And it had those Mikado trademarks. Complicated plot, Oriental setting. They tried very hard at clever jokes. Like at one point, the King of Siam said, "I don't rain, I sprinkle." Oh, it had a lot of other good ones like that, too. Look, if you notice on the poster, it was called, in this production, a comedy operetta. And at other times, it was called an operatic burletta. Those are tongue twisters. Well, burletta simply meant that, again, the leading lady played the hero's part in male tights. Well, let's see if the music had the influence of Arthur Sullivan in it. Maestro? that had kind of the Sullivan bounce to it, didn't it? Oh, the name of it, by the way, was The Man with an Elephant on His Hands. Well, remember in last week's session, we told you that in some shows, they had sentimental ballads that were interpolated into the production, songs put in after the show opened. Well, Wang had a sentimental ballad, too. But this was part of the original score. And that was called Every Rose Must Have a Thorn. Here's Barbara to sing it for you.
Day by day love's rose unfolding, first the bud and then the bloom. In our heart of hearts we're holding, bringing sunshine to life's gloom. But too late we learn of sorrow, strife today brings not but tears. Joy today is grief tomorrow. Every rose must have its thorn, but today we learn of sorrow. Every rose must have its thorn, but too late we learn of sorrow. Every rose must have its
Can you imagine the effect that had on the audience at that time? Oh. Well, as the ad said, Wang went over with a bang. But Wang wasn't the first American comic opera. The first one was produced about 5 years before that, and that was called The Little Tycoon. We have another poster showing you that The Little Tycoon had words and music by Willard Spencer. And this spoofed the American craze for foreign titles, you know, Raja and Maharani. And it had American characters in an American setting. Had a very simple plot, too. Listen to this. Steaming for the United States aboard a luxury liner electric, a multimillionaire named General Knickerbocker, one of the old-time Knickerbockers, is trying to marry off his lovely daughter Violet to a wealthy passenger named Lord Dolphin. But Violet, an ungrateful little girl, loves Alvin. But Alvin is back home in the States. Well, the boat docks, the Knickerbockers return home. Alvin makes a bold attempt to enter their palatial Newport estate, but he is unceremoniously booted out. But the next time that shrewd Alvin returns, he's disguised as the most powerful man in the world, the great tycoon of Japan. Well, this completely fools old General Knickerbocker, who welcomes our Alvin with open arms and promptly gives him the hand of lovely Violet in marriage. Well, our hero Alvin then bestows upon his blushing bride the title of the Little Tycoon. And they both live, how else but happily ever after. Well, that's the plot. Now let's listen to some of the music.
If you please. Thank you. For we're immensely high-toned, high-toned, high-toned. Kalamazoo, zoo, 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 zoo. Zoo, 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 Kalamazoo, zoo, 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 zoo. Yes, we're immensely high-toned, high-toned, high-toned. Kalamazoo, zoo, 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 zoo. Zoo, 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 Kalamazoo, zoo.
Maestro, we heard how the music of Wang was influenced by Arthur Sullivan. What's the story on The Little Tycoon?
Oh, undoubtedly. There was a very great influence from the Italian opera style. Take, just for an example, take opera Il Trovatore. By the way, who composed Il Trovatore? Anybody of you knows? Bravo. Very good.
Verdi, right.
Very
Speak right up now. Don't
Very,
forget.
very good. See, El Trovatore was performed the first time in Italy in 1853 and performed in New York for the first time 1855 at the first Academy of Music. Now, I don't want to tell you there is copy note for note. No, it's a style, a great influence of a style from one to another. I will play a few bars from El Trovatore and then from a few bars from the Tycoon, and you see how similar they are. This is El Trovatore. This is a Tycoon. One style sounds like the continuation of the other.
Bravo, Maestro. Well, you could see that American composers were influenced from outside sources. And since American composers couldn't write enough operettas during that time to meet the public demand, producers went overseas for their musical stage plays. And another great influence of that time was the father of the opera bouffe, the man who introduced the can-can to Paris, Jacques Offenbach. Well, as you heard, Offenbach had a knack for writing bright, saucy, very French music. And his operas bouffe were witty, and they were a little risque, but they were never vulgar. And one of the big hits of the time was called The Grand Duchess of Gerolstein, and that starred Lillian Russell. Well, that had an element that almost every comic opera of its time had, the love of all things military.
Dote on the military, dote on the military, dote on the military, with their uniforms so bright, their mustache and trappings light. Oh, I dote on the military, dote on the military, dote on the military, with their manners bright. I, indeed I.
Well, there was one more European influence, the king of the waltz opera, Johann Strauss. And I'd like you to do the research on Johann Strauss. So those were the European influences, Gilbert and Sullivan, Offenbach, Johann Strauss. And they helped to shape the American operetta. But at this very same time, there were other musical entertainments which were flourishing. Extravaganza, a vaudeville, burlesque, musical farce comedy. And in the 1880s, they were kind of all blending and blurring together until at one point you couldn't tell one from the other. But they were all developing toward present-day musical comedy and revue. Maestro, what would be a good selection to kind of close our workshop with today?
As you said before, one of the greatest composers of that period was Johann Strauss. So we close with Waltz from the Fledermaus.
The American Musical Theater is produced by WCBS-TV in cooperation with the Board of Education of the City of New York. Today's program featured Alfredo Antonini and the CBS Orchestra, with Earl Wrightson and Barbara Meister. The host for the workshop, Jim Morse. The students participating on today's program are from the high schools of the City of New York. Visual material courtesy of the Drama Collection of the New York Public Library and the New York City Center Opera Company. This has been a presentation of the WCBS-TV Public Affairs Department.